The evening sun was setting over Silicon Valley as luxurious cars pulled up to the Grand Plaza Hotel. This wasn't just any tech event. It was the tech event of the year, where industry giants gathered to shape the future of technology. Among the arriving guests was a woman in her mid-30s, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her natural hair styled elegantly, and her confident stride matching her accomplished background. As a senior executive at one of the fastest-growing tech companies, she had earned her place at this exclusive gathering. Her company had recently made headlines for its groundbreaking artificial intelligence solutions, and she had personally led the team behind their success. The VIP pass hanging around her neck represented years of hard work, countless late nights, and an unwavering dedication to excellence. The hotel's grand entrance was bustling with activity. Men and women in expensive attire breezed through the security checkpoint, flashing their VIP passes with casual ease. The atmosphere was filled with excitement. After all, this was where million-dollar deals were made and industry-changing partnerships were formed. As she approached the VIP entrance, something shifted in the atmosphere. The security guard's welcoming smile faded into a look of suspicion. "Ma'am, could you step aside for a moment?" he asked, his tone notably different from the one he'd used with previous guests. She complied, maintaining her professional composure despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. "I'll need to verify your credentials," the guard said, scrutinizing her VIP pass as if it were a mysterious artifact. Meanwhile, other attendees continued to walk past, their passes receiving nothing more than a cursory glance. A group of executives who had arrived after her were already being ushered into the VIP section with warm smiles and friendly nods. She reached into her designer bag and produced her business cards, company ID, and even pulled up her profile on her company's website on her phone. Yet, the questioning continued. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" asked another security staff member who had joined the first. "The general admission entrance is around the corner." The implications of their words hung heavy in the air. Despite her executive position, despite her company's reputation, despite the valid VIP pass around her neck, they couldn't, or wouldn't, believe she belonged there. Their eyes held that familiar look she had seen too many times before, the one that said, "You don't fit our image of a tech executive." She took a deep breath, her mind racing with possible responses. Years of experience had taught her that reactions in moments like these could either escalate the situation or transform it into an opportunity. As she stood there, she noticed a young woman of color in hotel staff uniform watching the scene unfold, her eyes reflecting a mix of concern and recognition. Time seemed to slow down as she considered her options. She could demand to speak to a manager, create a scene, or share the incident on social media, all perfectly justified responses to this blatant discrimination. Instead, she pulled out her phone and quietly began documenting everything: names, times, badge numbers, and witnesses. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen as she forwarded the details to her personal email. The head of security finally approached, his demeanor suggesting he was prepared to deliver the final verdict on her eligibility to enter the VIP section. Little did any of them know that this moment would become a turning point, not just in her career, but in the entire company's future. Sometimes, the most powerful responses to discrimination aren't immediate reactions, but carefully planned transformations that change the system from within. The head of security approached with an air of authority, his walkie-talkie crackling at his hip. His name badge gleamed under the hotel's crystal chandeliers as he looked down at a tablet in his hands. "There seems to be some confusion about your access level," he said, his voice carrying that practiced tone of someone who had already made up his mind. Behind him, another group of executives walked through without any scrutiny, their VIP passes identical to hers. A man in an off-the-rack suit, who she recognized as a junior developer from a smaller tech firm, was waved through with a friendly smile. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious. "I'd assure you, there's no confusion," she replied, her voice steady despite the frustration building inside her chest. She pulled out her phone again, opening her email to show the official VIP invitation. I'm the Executive Vice President of Technology at my company. Here's the invitation, my company ID, and you can easily verify my position online. The head of security barely glanced at her phone. Ma'am, we get people trying to access the VIP section all the time. Perhaps you misunderstood the invitation. The general admission area has some excellent networking opportunities as well. His condescending tone made it clear, in his mind, someone like her couldn't possibly be a tech executive. A small crowd had begun to gather, trying to appear disinterested while stealing glances at the scene. She noticed a few uncomfortable looks from other attendees, but no one stepped forward to help. This was a familiar scenario in her career. Being the only one who looked like her in rooms full of tech leaders, constantly having to prove she belonged. Let me be very clear, she said, maintaining her composure but allowing her voice to carry the weight of her position. I'm not confused about anything. I'm a keynote speaker at tomorrow's panel on artificial intelligence and corporate innovation. Would you like to explain to the event organizers why one of their speakers was barred from the VIP networking session? The security head's expression flickered for a moment, but he doubled down. We have strict protocols to follow. Without additional verification, I can only offer you access to the general admission area. He gestured toward the other entrance, as if directing traffic. She looked around the grand lobby, taking in the scene. Through the glass doors of the VIP section, she could see people mingling, making connections, and probably closing deals that would shape the industry's future. Deals she should be part of. Conversations she had earned the right to join. Instead of arguing further, she pulled out her business notebook and wrote down every detail. The head of security's name and badge number, the time, the witnesses, and exact quotes from their conversation. She noticed him shifting uncomfortably as she documented everything. I'll take your general admission offer, she said finally, her voice calm, but carrying an undertone that made the security head look up from his tablet. And I want you to remember this interaction very clearly, every detail of it. As she walked toward the general admission entrance, she held her head high. Some might have seen this as a defeat, but she knew better. Throughout her career, she had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination wasn't an immediate reaction, but a calculated step toward bigger change. She sent a quick email to her assistant, requesting information about the company that managed the event's security. As she stepped into the main conference area, her mind was already formulating a plan. These people had no idea who they were dealing with, but they would learn, and the lesson would be one they'd never forget. The general admission area was crowded with young entrepreneurs and mid-level managers, all hoping to catch the attention of the VIP executives in the other section. Little did anyone know that the most influential person in the room had just been forced to join them. She smiled to herself, knowing that sometimes the best victories come disguised as temporary setbacks. The general admission area buzzed with activity, but she moved through it with purpose. Her mind was already working on something bigger than just getting into the VIP section. She pulled out her phone and opened her Notes app, her fingers flying across the screen as she documented every detail of what had just happened while it was still fresh in her memory. "Excuse me," a soft voice interrupted her typing. She looked up to see a young event staff member nervously twisting her badge. "I saw what happened back there. It wasn't right. I've been working these events for 2 years, and I've seen this happen to other people too." The staff member glanced around before continuing. They never questioned the usual crowd, if you know what I mean. This was exactly the kind of information she needed. She smiled warmly at the staff member, encouraging her to continue. For the next few minutes, they had a quiet conversation about patterns of behavior at these events. She learned that this wasn't just a one-time incident, it was part of a larger problem. As she moved through the evening, she put her years of executive experience to work, but not in the way she'd planned. Instead of networking for her company, she was gathering intelligence. She noted which security company handled the event, who owned the venue, and most importantly, who sat on the board of directors for the company running these exclusive tech gatherings. The irony wasn't lost on her when she overheard a group discussing their upcoming panel on diversity in tech. She recognized one of the speakers, a man who had walked right past her during the VIP entrance incident without saying a word. He was now enthusiastically talking about breaking down barriers in the industry. She pulled up the company's latest annual report on her tablet, studying their organizational structure and corporate values. Their website boasted about inclusion and equal opportunities, with smiling faces of diverse employees carefully placed on their homepage. The disconnect between their public image and actual practices was striking. Between conversations, she sent emails to her network, making discreet inquiries about the company's leadership positions, their hiring practices, and most importantly, any upcoming changes in their executive team. Her questions were casual, but strategic. Like pieces on a chessboard, she was setting everything up for a larger move. A familiar face caught her attention. One of her former colleagues who now worked for a major tech publication. They caught up briefly, and she carefully planted seeds about the evening's events without explicitly complaining. She knew how the tech industry worked. Information was currency, and timing was everything. As the evening progressed, she noticed something interesting. Being in the general admission area actually gave her a better view of how the company operated. She saw how younger professionals of color were subtly directed away from certain areas, how security staff treated different groups with varying levels of scrutiny, and how these behaviors created invisible barriers to advancement. She opened her laptop at a quiet corner table and started drafting a detailed proposal. This wasn't going to be a social media call-out or a public relations nightmare for the company. No, she had something much more impactful in mind. She was going to change things from the inside out. The document began to take shape. A comprehensive plan for corporate transformation, focusing on security protocols, staff training, event management, and inclusive leadership. She added specific metrics for success, budget considerations, and implementation timelines. This wasn't just a complaint. It was a vision for change. By the end of the evening, what had started as a humiliating experience had transformed into an opportunity. She had names, numbers, witnesses, and most importantly, a clear picture of a system that needed change. As she walked out of the hotel, she didn't feel like a victim of discrimination. She felt like someone who had just found her next big project. In her car, she made one final note in her phone. Check board member term limits and executive position openings. Sometimes, she thought, the best response to being shown the door is to come back and own the building. 6 months flew by like pages turning in the wind. The tech executive had turned that frustrating evening into fuel for her ambitions, pushing herself harder than ever before. Her team's innovative AI solutions were making waves across the industry, catching the attention of major tech publications and industry leaders alike. During a Monday morning meeting, she was presenting her latest project results when her phone buzzed with an interesting notification. A colleague had sent her a news article. The CEO of the company that ran those exclusive tech events was stepping down. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the headline, but she kept her composure, continuing her presentation without missing a beat. Back in her office, she dug deeper into the news. The company was struggling with its public image. Their events, once considered the crown jewels of the tech industry, were facing criticism for lack of diversity and inclusion. Attendance was dropping as younger, more progressive tech companies started hosting their own gatherings. She pulled out her laptop and opened a folder labeled Future Projects. Inside was the detailed transformation plan she'd created after that eventful night, refined and expanded over the past months. What had started as a response to discrimination had evolved into a complete vision for modernizing how tech events could be run. During lunch, she received a call from a board member of another tech company. "Your recent AI project is impressive," he said, "but what really caught my attention was how you transformed your team's culture. We don't see that kind of leadership often. She smiled, knowing her reputation was growing beyond just technical achievements. That evening, she stayed late in her office, updating her professional portfolio. Her wall displayed various awards and recognitions, each representing a barrier broken, a challenge overcome. She added fresh numbers to her presentation: 200% team growth, 45% increase in diversity hiring, and a remarkable 98% team retention rate. Her phone rang again. This time, it was an old mentor who now sat on several high-profile boards. "Had you seen the news about the CEO position?" her mentor asked. "You should throw your hat in the ring. They need someone with fresh perspectives." The suggestion wasn't entirely unexpected. She'd been carefully positioning herself for months. The next day, she walked through her company's office, observing the vibrant, diverse team she'd built. Junior developers collaborated with senior architects. People from different backgrounds exchanged ideas freely, and the energy was contagious. She'd created the kind of environment she wished she'd found when she started her career. At home that evening, she sat in her home office, surrounded by photos of her family and the people who had supported her journey. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Sometimes, life's biggest disappointments lead to your greatest opportunities." She opened her laptop and began drafting her application for the CEO position. Her application wasn't just a list of achievements. It was a vision for the future. She included her transformation plan, now expanded into a comprehensive strategy for revolutionizing the tech events industry. Every slide, every number, every proposal was backed by her real-world success in building inclusive, high-performing teams. As she worked late into the night, she remembered standing in that hotel lobby, being told she didn't belong. Now she was preparing to lead the very company that had once doubted her. The irony wasn't lost on her, but this wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation, about creating spaces where no one would have to prove they belonged. Before submitting her application, she added one final touch: a photo of her speaking at a recent tech conference, where she'd received a standing ovation for her keynote on innovative leadership. The confident woman in that photo was ready to take on an even bigger challenge. She clicked send and smiled, knowing that sometimes the best way to change the system is to become the one running it. The interview process began on a crisp morning in the same building where she'd been denied VIP access months ago. As she walked through the revolving doors, the same security guard was at the desk. This time, though, he straightened up immediately, having been briefed about the CEO candidate's arrival. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on her, but she kept her expression neutral and professional. The boardroom on the top floor offered a stunning view of the city skyline. 8 board members sat around a massive oak table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She recognized a few faces from tech magazines and industry events. These were the people who had shaped the company's culture for years, the culture she was proposing to transform. "Your track record is impressive," began the board chairman, shuffling through her resume. "But this company has certain traditions, a particular way of doing things. What makes you think you can lead an organization of this size and history?" The emphasis on the last word was subtle but clear. She opened her presentation with confidence. Instead of beginning with her personal achievements, she shared market research showing how tech events were evolving. "The future of this industry isn't in exclusivity," she explained, displaying charts of changing demographics in tech leadership. "It's in innovation and inclusion. And those aren't just buzzwords. They're paths to profit." The boardroom grew quiet as she walked them through her vision. She showed how companies with diverse leadership consistently outperformed their competitors. Her slides presented hard data, market trends, revenue projections, and case studies from her own successful projects. One board member, an older gentleman who hadn't smiled since she entered, leaned forward. "These are interesting theories," he said, his tone dismissive. "But our current model has worked for 20 years. Why fix what isn't broken?" She was ready for this question. Is it really working? she asked, pulling up their company's recent performance data. Your market share has dropped 15% in the last 2 years. Newer, more inclusive tech events are drawing away your key sponsors. But, she paused, clicking to the next slide. I see this as an opportunity. Her transformation plan unfolded slide by slide. It wasn't just about diversity. It was about modernizing every aspect of their business. She outlined new technologies to streamline event management, innovative networking formats, and partnerships with emerging tech companies. The numbers spoke for themselves: projected growth, cost savings, and expanded market reach. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The skeptical faces began showing interest. Even the dismissive board member was taking notes. She moved on to discuss specific changes she'd implement in her first 100 days as CEO. Her plan was practical, detailed, and most importantly, profitable. During the Q&A session, questions flew rapidly. She answered each one with precision, drawing from her years of experience and thorough research of the company. When asked about her leadership style, she shared stories of building successful teams, carefully avoiding any mention of the discrimination she'd faced. The final question came from the youngest board member. This is an ambitious plan, she said. What makes you so confident you can execute it? Standing by the window, she gazed briefly at the city below. Because I've done it before, she replied, turning back to face them. Every project I've led, every team I've built, every obstacle I've overcome, they've all prepared me for this moment. I'm not just offering ideas. I'm offering proven results. As she concluded her presentation, the energy in the room was palpable. She had done more than interview for a position. She had presented them with a mirror showing both their company's current reality and its potential future. Whether they were ready for that change would soon become clear. Walking out of the boardroom, she felt a sense of accomplishment. Regardless of their decision, she had stayed true to her vision while proving her worth through facts, figures, and unwavering professionalism. She had shown them not just who she was, but who they could become under her leadership. The call came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after her interview. She was in the middle of reviewing project reports when her phone lit up with an unknown number. The board chairman's voice carried a warmth that hadn't been present during the interview. We'd like to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer, he said. The board voted unanimously. She took a moment to let the words sink in. Through her office window, she could see the city skyline, the same view she'd had during her interview, but now it looked different. This was no longer just a city where she worked. It was about to become her platform for change. The next few hours were a whirlwind of calls and meetings. Her current team gathered in the conference room, and she shared the news. Their genuine excitement and support brought tears to her eyes. These were the people who had helped her build her reputation, who had witnessed her journey firsthand. As she packed up her office that evening, she found the notebook where she documented the VIP event incident months ago. Reading through her notes, she felt no bitterness, only a sense of purpose. That evening had led her here, to a position where she could make real, lasting change. The official announcement was scheduled for the next morning. She arrived at her soon-to-be new workplace early, wearing a bright power suit that her mother had helped her choose. The security guard who had once denied her entry was among the first to congratulate her, though he didn't recognize her from that night. The press conference was held in the main lobby. Cameras flashed as she took the podium, becoming one of the few black women to lead a major events and hospitality company. Her acceptance speech was carefully crafted, focusing on innovation and growth rather than dwelling on the past. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter, she announced, her voice clear and confident. We're going to redefine what excellence means in this industry. After the formal announcement, she walked through each department, meeting her new employees. Their reactions varied from excitement to uncertainty. Change often brought both. In the security office, she paid special attention, knowing this would be one of the first departments to see major updates in training and protocols. Back in the boardroom, now her boardroom, she had her first lunch with the executive team. The same people who had grilled her during the interview now looked to her for leadership. The older board member who had been most skeptical during her interview was the first to raise his glass in a toast. That afternoon, she received hundreds of messages from well-wishers, but one stood out. It was from the young event staff member who had spoken to her during that fateful networking event. "You did it," the message read. "You're going to change everything, aren't you?" She smiled, saving the message to read again later. As evening approached, she took a moment alone in her new office. The view was spectacular, but her eyes were drawn to a small frame she'd brought with her, a photo of her grandmother, who had always told her to turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones. Those words had never felt more real than they did today. She opened her laptop and began drafting an email to all employees. This wasn't just about her appointment. It was about their collective future. She wrote about her vision for the company, about creating spaces where everyone could thrive, about turning their events into true celebrations of talent and innovation. The sun was setting as she finished the email. Tomorrow would begin the real work, implementing changes, shifting cultures, and proving that inclusion and success go hand in hand. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply appreciate how far she'd come. From being denied entry to running the entire operation, life had a way of coming full circle. She took one last look around her office before heading home. On her desk lay the company access card, an all-access pass that would open every door in every venue they operated. The irony brought a smile to her face. Sometimes, she thought, the best response to being kept out is to come back with the keys to the whole building. Her first day as CEO started bright and early. She arrived at 7 a.m., before most of the staff, and took a quiet walk through every floor of the building. This wasn't just her new workplace. It was ground zero for the changes she planned to implement across the entire company. The first order of business was a company-wide audit. She brought in independent consultants to review everything from hiring practices to event security protocols. The results confirmed what she already knew from personal experience. There were systemic issues that needed addressing. In the security office, she sat down with the team that had once turned her away. "Today, we're going to talk about what excellent security actually looks like," she began. The guards shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but she kept her tone professional and focused on the future. "It's not about keeping people out. It's about making sure the right people feel welcome while staying safe." The training sessions she implemented weren't the usual boring presentations. She brought in experts who used real-life scenarios, including her own experience, though she never mentioned it was her story. The security team learned about unconscious bias, proper verification procedures, and most importantly, how to maintain security while treating everyone with respect. Word spread quickly about the changes she was making. Some longtime employees resisted at first. "We've always done it this way," became a common phrase in meetings. Her response was always the same. "And now we're going to do it better." She backed up every change with data showing how inclusive practices led to better business outcomes. One morning, she overheard two employees talking in the break room. "Have you noticed how different the atmosphere is lately?" one said to the other. "It feels like we're actually part of something important." She smiled to herself, knowing the cultural shift was already taking root. The biggest test came when they hosted their first major tech event under her leadership. She personally reviewed the new security protocols, making sure every staff member understood that their job was to protect and welcome, not to judge and exclude. The registration process was streamlined, with clear guidelines for verifying credentials that left no room for bias. During the event, she watched from a quiet corner as a young woman in a wheelchair was immediately assisted by staff who had been trained in accessibility support. Nearby, a group of young developers from various backgrounds moved freely between the general and VIP areas, their credentials checked quickly and respectfully. The changes weren't just about access. They were about creating genuine opportunities. She introduced mentorship programs, partnering experienced industry leaders with promising newcomers from underrepresented groups. The networking sessions were redesigned to be more inclusive, with smaller group settings that made it easier for everyone to participate. In the back office, she worked on the numbers. Revenue was growing as more companies wanted to partner with them, attracted by their new reputation for running truly inclusive events. The board members who had been skeptical were now her strongest supporters, seeing how positive change could also be good for business. She kept that old VIP pass from the night she was turned away, now framed on her office wall next to the company's new mission statement. It served as a reminder of why these changes mattered. Every morning, she looked at it and remembered that sometimes the best way to fix a broken system is to become the person in charge of it. One evening, as she was leaving the office, she passed the security desk and saw a guard carefully explaining the entry process to a young tech professional who looked nervous about her first big event. The guard was patient, respectful, and welcoming. Exactly the way it should be. She watched the young woman's shoulders relax as she was guided inside, and knew that the real measure of success wasn't in the profits or the praise, but in these small moments of change. 6 months into her role as CEO, the company was preparing for its biggest event of the year, the same one where she had once been turned away. The Grand Hotel lobby was buzzing with activity as staff made final preparations. This time, everything was different. She stood at the same entrance where her journey had begun, watching as the new security team welcomed guests. Their training had paid off. Each interaction was professional, respectful, and efficient. The difference was clear in the small things. The way they made eye contact, their welcoming smiles, the absence of that subtle scrutiny that some guests had faced before. A young security guard approached her with a tablet. "We've updated the verification system," he explained proudly. "Now it's completely streamlined, same quick process for everyone, no exceptions." She nodded, remembering how different things had been just a year ago. The guard had no idea he was showing these improvements to someone who had once been denied entry at this very spot. The event was at full capacity, with a more diverse crowd than ever before. Tech leaders from all backgrounds moved freely between sections, their conversations focused on innovation and collaboration rather than who belonged where. The energy was electric. This was what a true networking event should feel like. She gathered her senior staff for an impromptu meeting near the main stage. "Look around," she said quietly. "This is what success looks like." They watched as entrepreneurs of all backgrounds chatted with industry veterans, as young developers shared ideas with CEOs, as people who might have been turned away a year ago now led panel discussions. One of her board members, the same one who had been most skeptical during her interview, approached with a group of investors. "Our profits are up 40% since the changes," he announced proudly. "Turns out, making people feel welcome is good for business." She smiled, knowing that the real victory wasn't just in the numbers, it was in the transformed atmosphere. During a break between sessions, she overheard a conversation that made her pause. Two young tech professionals were talking about their experience. "I was nervous about coming," one admitted. "I'd heard stories about these events. But this is amazing. It's like they actually want us here." Her companion nodded. "Finally feels like we belong in tech." She took a moment to visit the security office, where the team was monitoring the event. The head of security, a new hire who emphasized respect as much as safety, was giving a briefing. "Remember," he was saying, "our job is to protect and welcome. Everyone with valid credentials is a VIP. No exceptions, no assumptions." Later that evening, she stood on the main stage, preparing to give her keynote speech. The audience represented every corner of the tech industry: startup founders, corporate executives, developers, designers, all watching expectantly. This was her moment to share the bigger picture. A year ago, she began, "I stood outside this very building, experiencing firsthand how it feels to be judged not by your credentials, but by assumptions." A hushed silence fell over the room. Today, I stand before you not just as a CEO, but as living proof that change is possible when we dare to transform our challenges into opportunities. The story she shared wasn't just about her personal journey, it was about the power of transformation, about turning exclusion into inclusion, about making success accessible to everyone with the talent and drive to achieve it. As she spoke, she could see recognition dawning on some faces, including a few security staff who had been there that night. When she finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. But what meant more were the tears she saw in some eyes, the knowing nods from those who had faced similar barriers, the proud smiles of her team who had helped make this change possible. After her speech, a line of people waited to talk to her. Some shared their own stories of exclusion. Others thanked her for the changes she'd implemented. But the most meaningful moment came when a young security guard approached her. "I was here that night," he said quietly. "I didn't speak up then, but I want you to know, you've taught us all what real leadership looks like." 1 year had passed since she became CEO, and the company's transformation was making headlines in the tech industry. Major news outlets were running stories about how a single company had revolutionized the way tech events were organized. But sitting in her office, looking at the framed VIP pass on her wall, she knew this was about much more than just business success. The quarterly report sat on her desk, showing numbers that made the board members smile. Attendance at their events was up by 60%. Sponsor satisfaction had reached record highs, and their profit margins had never been better. But it was the other statistics that made her proud. The diversity numbers, the satisfaction surveys, the stories of careers launched because someone finally got their chance to shine. She walked through the office, stopping to chat with her team. The workspace looked different now. The walls that once displayed generic corporate artwork now showcased success stories from their events. Photographs of innovative projects, quotes from attendees whose lives had changed, headlines about breakthrough partnerships that started at their conferences. In the training room, new security staff were going through their orientation. The training manual now included a section titled "The Power of Welcome." Her story had become a case study, though many didn't know it was about their own CEO. She watched as the trainer explained how proper verification procedures could be both thorough and respectful. Her phone buzzed with a message from a board member sharing an email from a major tech company. They wanted to partner exclusively with her company for their events, specifically citing the inclusive atmosphere and professional management. "Your vision has become our biggest selling point," the board member wrote. Later that afternoon, she visited one of their smaller events. These intimate gatherings had been her idea, creating spaces where newcomers to the industry could connect with established leaders in a less intimidating environment. She watched as a young developer demonstrated her project to a group of investors, remembering her own early days in tech. The security team at the entrance operated with smooth efficiency. Each guest was treated with the same respectful professionalism, whether they were a famous tech CEO or a student attending their first industry event. The head of security caught her eye and smiled. They both knew how far things had come. In the evening, she had a video call with other industry leaders. They wanted to know her secret, how she had managed to increase both profitability and inclusion. "It's simple," she explained. "We stopped seeing diversity as a challenge to overcome and started seeing it as the key to innovation." Before heading home, she took one last walk through the building. In the lobby, the cleaning staff was preparing for the next day's events. They greeted her warmly. She knew all their names, had made sure every employee, regardless of position, felt valued. This was what real change looked like. On her desk, a stack of applications waited for review. They were expanding, opening new venues, spreading their model of inclusive excellence across the country. Each application represented a chance to extend their impact, to create more spaces where talent could thrive regardless of background. She picked up her bag, ready to head home, when a young employee stopped her. "Can I tell you something?" the employee asked. "I was at that event last year in the general admission section. I saw how things used to be. What you've done here, It's changed everything. Walking to her car, she remembered that night of rejection, how it had felt to be judged and dismissed. Now, a year later, she had transformed that moment of exclusion into a movement of inclusion. The company had become a model for the industry, proof that doing the right thing was also the smart thing. As she drove home, she thought about all the future leaders who would walk through those doors, all the dreams that would find their chance to grow. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure no one else has to face the same barriers. She had done more than take over a company. She had changed its soul.